The burning sting across my cheek lingered long after the slap landed. It wasn't just the pain. It was the silence that followed. Inside the spacious living room of the home my late husband and I had spent decades building, nearly 50 guests stood frozen with drinks in their hands, staring at me as though they had just witnessed the ending of a stage play. Only moments earlier, my daughter-in-law, Lydia, had confidently extended a decorative wooden box toward me and demanded the keys to my master bedroom. According to her, the room now belonged to her mother, who would be moving into my home permanently. When I quietly refused, she responded by striking me across the face. My son, Connor, stood only a few feet away. He lowered his eyes. He said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't touch my cheek or ask anyone for sympathy. I simply turned around, walked through the sliding patio doors, and stepped into the cool evening air. The chatter behind me faded as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I typed 4 simple words to my daughter, Rachel. Start now. I pressed send. Less than a minute later, a terrified scream echoed from upstairs. Then another. Soon, the peaceful anniversary celebration dissolved into complete chaos. But none of those people understood why. To them, everything had fallen apart in seconds. For me, it had taken 8 long months. I was 65 years old, widowed for nearly 5 years after losing my husband George to a sudden heart attack. Together, we had built a comfortable life. Our mortgage had been paid off years before he passed away, leaving me with a beautiful 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names. Life alone wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. My mornings belonged to coffee on the back porch, afternoons to gardening, and evenings to books or old movies. My finances were carefully managed, and I never depended on anyone. Then Connor called. His landlord had increased the rent again. He and Lydia wanted just 6 months to save enough money for a down payment on their own house. I hate asking, Mom, he'd said, but we'd really appreciate the help. I didn't hesitate. He was my son. I welcomed them into my home. Looking back now, that was the easiest decision I ever made, and the most expensive. During the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. They occupied the 2 guest bedrooms upstairs while I continued living on the first floor. Everyone respected each other's space, or at least that's what I believed. Then the little changes began. One afternoon, after returning from grocery shopping, I stopped in the living room. The curtains were different. The warm burgundy drapes George had picked years earlier had disappeared. In their place hung thin white panels that barely blocked the sunlight. Even my heavy oak coffee table had vanished, replaced by a fragile glass one that looked more suitable for a furniture showroom than a family home. Lydia sat comfortably on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. Without looking up, she smiled. I thought the room needed a fresher look. I quietly examined the space before asking, "Where are my curtains?" "They're upstairs," she answered casually. "These make the room feel younger. Younger, as though my home had suddenly become hers to redesign." I climbed upstairs, found my curtains folded inside the guest room closet, carried them back down, and rehung them before dinner. I said nothing. Lydia watched from the hallway. Neither of us smiled. The following week, several of my favorite coffee mugs disappeared. George had collected them during our travels over nearly 40 years of marriage. Everyone carried a memory. When I asked Connor whether he'd seen them, he shrugged. Lydia answered instead. They didn't really match the kitchen anymore. Hours later, I discovered every mug inside a donation box sitting in the garage. I washed each one carefully before placing them back inside the cabinet. The next morning, I installed a small lock on one pantry cupboard where I kept sentimental items. Connor frowned. "Mom, isn't that a little extreme?" I looked directly at him. "No." His expression fell. "Throwing away someone else's belongings is extreme." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That was when I realized something painful. My son wasn't cruel. He was simply unwilling to confront his wife. Every disagreement ended the same way. Connor remained silent. Lydia made the decisions, and slowly, those decisions began changing my home. I started paying closer attention. The way Lydia referred to the house as our place whenever friends visited. The way she invited people over without asking. the way she spoke about future renovations, as though ownership had already been decided. Each incident by itself seemed small. Together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. For Lydia, living in my house wasn't temporary, it was the beginning of a takeover. By the 4th month, the atmosphere inside my home had changed completely. Connor and Lydia no longer behaved like temporary guests. They acted like homeowners waiting for paperwork to catch up with reality. Every Saturday morning, Lydia hosted brunches for her friends. Laughter drifted through the house while I quietly sat on the back patio with a novel and a cup of coffee. More than once, I overheard her introducing the property. "We're thinking about remodeling. Our backyard needs a makeover. We'll probably knock down that wall." Every sentence made it sound as though my name had vanished from the deed. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned home earlier than expected after meeting an old friend for lunch. As I walked through the side gate, I stopped in disbelief. A pickup truck was parked in the driveway. A man wearing a construction vest stood in the backyard, stretching a measuring tape across my lawn while another worker took notes on a clipboard. Lydia stood beside them, pointing toward my flower beds. "I'd love a swimming pool right here," she said enthusiastically. "We'll probably remove those bushes." Those bushes weren't ordinary landscaping. George had planted every single rose with his own hands during the final spring before he passed away. I walked across the yard. The contractor noticed me first. "Good afternoon," he greeted politely. Without raising my voice, I took the clipboard from Lydia's hands and returned it to him. "There won't be a pool," I said calmly. The contractor looked confused. Lydia crossed her arms. I was only getting estimates. I met the contractor's eyes. "I'm the homeowner." His expression changed immediately. "I understand, ma'am." He apologized, gathered his equipment, and motioned for his crew to leave. Within moments, the truck disappeared down the street. Lydia spun toward me, furious. "You embarrassed me." "No," I answered evenly. "You embarrassed yourself." She stepped closer. "This backyard is outdated. It isn't yours to update." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stormed inside, slamming the back door so hard that the windows rattled. That evening, Connor attempted to smooth everything over. "She just likes planning things," he explained while avoiding eye contact. I folded my newspaper. "Planning improvements on someone else's property isn't planning. It's pretending," Connor sighed. "Mom, no," I interrupted him gently. "You are both welcome to stay until you're financially stable, but don't mistake kindness for ownership." He nodded without arguing. Once again, nothing changed, or so he thought. Over the following weeks, another visitor became a regular presence in my home, Lydia's mother, Janice. She arrived carrying oversized suitcases despite claiming she was staying just this. From the moment she entered the house, she criticized everything: the lighting, the furniture, the wallpaper, even the color of my kitchen cabinets. During dinner on her second evening, she finally revealed why she had become so interested in my house. She set down her fork and smiled. "You know," she began sweetly, "a woman living alone doesn't really need that large master suite downstairs." Connor immediately became fascinated by his mashed potatoes. Lydia remained silent, waiting, watching. Janice continued. "My knees aren't what they used to be. The stairs upstairs are difficult. The downstairs bedroom would make much more sense for me." I took a sip of water before answering. "It certainly would." Her smile widened. "But it's my bedroom." The smile disappeared just as quickly. "Family should help family." I nodded thoughtfully. "I agree. Which is why I've allowed 3 adults to live in my home without paying rent." Silence settled over the dining table. Connor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Janice frowned. Lydia stared at me with obvious irritation. Dinner ended shortly afterward. The next morning, I returned from my usual walk around the neighborhood. The moment I entered the hallway, I stopped 3 large suitcases, sat directly outside my bedroom door. Lydia stood nearby with folded arms. Connor lingered several steps behind her. "Mom's back is acting up," Lydia announced confidently. "We've already started moving her downstairs." I glanced at the luggage, then at the closed door to my bedroom. No one asked. They had simply decided. Without saying a word, I grabbed the first suitcase and rolled it toward the front door. Janice hurried from the kitchen. "What are you doing?" I ignored the question. One by one, I carried every suitcase outside and placed them neatly on the front porch. Lydia's face turned bright red. "You can't do that." I finally looked at all three of them. "If the guest room upstairs isn't comfortable," I replied calmly. "There's a lovely hotel less than 10 minutes away," Janice gasped. "You'd throw family out?" "No, I'd protect my home." Connor finally stepped forward. "Mom, can't we compromise?" I looked directly into my son's eyes. "The compromise," I answered quietly, "is that you've lived here rent-free for 8 months. My bedroom isn't part of that agreement." Without another word, I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. Outside, I could hear Lydia complaining, Janice grumbling, Connor apologizing. But none of it mattered anymore. For the first time since they moved in, they had discovered something important. I wasn't giving up my home. Not today. Not ever. After the confrontation over my bedroom, the atmosphere inside the house became unbearably tense. Lydia no longer bothered pretending to be polite. She barely acknowledged me when we crossed paths in the hallway. And every conversation she had seemed intentionally loud enough for me to hear. "I don't understand why some people refuse to move on," she remarked one afternoon while speaking to Janice in the kitchen. "They cling to things that should belong to the next generation." I knew exactly who she meant. I simply poured myself another cup of coffee and walked outside. Arguing with people determined to rewrite reality was a waste of energy. Instead, I watched, I listened, and I prepared. A week later, colorful invitations began arriving in the mail. Lydia had planned an extravagant anniversary celebration to mark 10 years of marriage with Connor. She invited nearly everyone she knew. Friends, co-workers, distant relatives, and neighbors I had never even met. The guest list grew larger every day. So did the expenses. A few mornings later, an email appeared in my inbox from a local catering company. The total bill exceeded $2,000. The invoice had been addressed to me, apparently. Lydia had assumed I would pay for everything without asking. I didn't call the caterer to complain. I simply forwarded the invoice to Connor. My message contained only one sentence: "This belongs to you. Please handle it today." Less than 5 minutes later, Lydia burst into the kitchen. "You embarrassed us," she snapped. I continued slicing vegetables for lunch. "I haven't embarrassed anyone. You refused to pay the caterer. I wasn't asked." She folded her arms. "You know we're trying to save money." I finally looked up. People paying for their own party isn't a hardship. It's called responsibility. She glared at me before storming out of the room. The house shook as another door slammed. That weekend, my daughter, Rachel, stopped by for lunch. Unlike her brother, Rachel had inherited her father's ability to recognize trouble before it became a disaster. She watched Lydia directing furniture deliveries through the front window before lowering her voice. "Mom," I nodded. "I've noticed." Rachel leaned closer. "I spoke to Connor yesterday." My attention shifted toward her. "They aren't saving for a house." I remained silent. "They've maxed out several credit cards. They took an expensive vacation last month. They don't have enough money for a down payment." She paused. "They're planning to stay here." I calmly stirred my iced tea. "I know." Rachel blinked. "You already knew?" "I've known for weeks." "Then why are you allowing that anniversary party?" A faint smile crossed my face. "Because sometimes people reveal their true intentions when they think they've already won." Rachel studied me for several moments. "You have a plan." "I do," she smiled. "Tell me what you need." Over the next 5 days, while Connor and Lydia were at work, Rachel arrived every morning shortly after breakfast. Together, we quietly began preparing. We purchased dozens of heavy-duty black storage bags. Then we walked upstairs. Everything inside Connor and Lydia's rooms was carefully packed. Every shirt, every pair of shoes, every framed photograph. Every kitchen appliance they had purchased, every decorative item Lydia insisted belonged in their future home. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was thrown away. Everything was neatly sealed inside labeled bags. By Friday evening, Both upstairs bedrooms were nearly empty. The bags filled the attic storage area above the second floor. Rachel looked around. "I've never seen anyone organize an eviction this neatly." I laughed softly. "Your father always said preparation beats confrontation." She smiled. He was right. While Rachel packed upstairs, I handled another responsibility downstairs. For years, I had quietly helped Connor financially. Without telling anyone, I paid part of his car insurance. I covered their cell phone plan. I guaranteed one of his vehicle loans when he was younger. I even paid several automatic household subscriptions every month. Those payments ended one by one. I contacted my bank. I removed myself as guarantor. I canceled automatic transfers. I closed every financial doorway they had quietly depended upon. None of it required an argument. Only paperwork. By Friday night, every document had been finalized. When Connor returned home that evening, he noticed nothing unusual. Neither did Lydia. They were too busy discussing seating arrangements and party decorations. From the upstairs hallway, Rachel watched them laughing together. "They have no idea," she whispered. I quietly folded another empty storage bag. "No, they don't." Saturday finally arrived. The anniversary celebration would begin at 6 o'clock. By noon, caterers filled the kitchen. Florists decorated every table. Music equipment lined the living room walls. Guests would soon arrive, believing they were attending a joyful celebration. None of them realized they were about to witness the end of an 8-month occupation. Rachel came downstairs dressed for the party. She glanced toward me. "Everything's ready." I nodded. "So am I." Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze drifting through the open patio doors. By 6 o'clock, my once peaceful home had transformed into the setting for an extravagant celebration. Music echoed through every room. Crystal glasses clinked together. Guests admired the decorations while waiters circulated with trays of expensive appetizers. Lydia floated through the crowd wearing a sparkling navy blue dress. Greeting everyone as though she were the lady of the house, Connor remained close beside her, smiling politely but looking exhausted. Janice entertained a group of relatives near the fireplace, enthusiastically describing the neighborhood. "I've always loved this area," she announced proudly. "I'll finally be living here soon." Several people congratulated her. I simply sipped my coffee and observed from across the room. Rachel had already slipped upstairs unnoticed nearly half an hour earlier. Everything was in position. Now all we needed was the right moment. Around 8 o'clock, Lydia gently tapped her champagne glass with a spoon. The music faded. Conversation stopped. Nearly every guest turned toward her with expectant smiles. "My friends," Lydia began cheerfully, wrapping one arm around Connor, "thank you for celebrating this special day with us." Applause filled the room. She waited until the noise settled before continuing. "Tonight isn't just our anniversary. We also have exciting family news." Several guests exchanged curious looks. Janice stepped forward. Grinning from ear to ear, Lydia raised her glass. "Beginning next week, my mother will officially be moving into this house permanently." More applause followed. Several relatives even cheered. Then Lydia turned toward me. Her smile remained, but her eyes hardened. "And because Margaret has graciously agreed to give us the downstairs master suite, Mom will be perfectly comfortable." The applause slowly faded. Confused expressions spread through the crowd. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. I calmly placed my coffee cup on the kitchen island. "I never agreed to that." The room became silent. Lydia laughed awkwardly, pretending I was joking. "Oh, don't tease." She walked toward me carrying a small decorative wooden box. "Go ahead." She held it out. "Just drop the keys inside." I looked at the empty box, then back at her. "No." Her smile disappeared. "Everyone is waiting. I don't care." Janice suddenly stepped beside her. "Don't be selfish," she snapped loudly. "A woman your age doesn't need that much space." Several of Lydia's relatives nodded in agreement. Someone muttered that family should support family. Another whispered that I was being unreasonable. Connor stood perfectly still. I searched his face for even the smallest sign that he intended to stop what was happening. There was none. He simply stared at the floor, The realization hurt more than the slap that would come later. My own son had known exactly what they planned. He had invited people into my home to pressure me into surrendering it. Lydia stepped even closer. "This is our home now," she hissed quietly enough that only I could hear. "You've had your time," I answered just as softly. "No." She suddenly reached toward my cardigan pocket. She knew exactly where I kept my house keys. Her fingers grabbed the fabric, trying to tear the pocket open. Before she could reach inside, I caught her wrist. My grip was firm. "Don't touch me." For a brief moment, she struggled against my hand. Then I released her wrist and stepped backward. Connor finally spoke. "Lydia." She spun toward him. "Stay out of it." Then she faced me again, breathing heavily. "I'm asking one last time. Give me the keys." "I won't." The words had barely left my mouth before her open hand struck my face. The sharp crack echoed through the silent room. Several guests gasped. Someone dropped a glass onto the hardwood floor. No one moved. No one spoke. The sting spread across my cheek, but I refused to react. Slowly, I looked directly into Lydia's furious eyes. Then I turned around without saying a single word. I walked through the sliding patio doors and stepped outside. The cool evening air felt strangely peaceful after the tension inside. Behind me, muffled voices filled the living room. Guests whispered nervously. Someone asked if they should call the police. Others wondered whether the party was over. None of them knew the evening had only just begun. I reached into my pocket and removed my phone. Rachel had been waiting upstairs for one message, nothing more. I opened our conversation. My fingers typed the same words we had agreed upon days earlier, "Scart now." I pressed send. Then I quietly slipped the phone back into my pocket. Standing alone beneath the patio lights, I counted silently 10 seconds, 20, 30, 45. Then the first scream shattered the night. The scream came from the second floor. It was Lydia. A second later, another cry followed. Then several guests looked upward just as a heavy black storage bag crashed onto the living room floor with a loud thud. The music had already stopped. Now complete confusion swept through the room. Another bag fell, then another. Within seconds, dozens of tightly packed black bags began tumbling over the upstairs balcony, landing across the hardwood floor, sofas, and coffee tables. One burst open as it hit the ground. Dawn Star's shoes scattered in every direction. A silk dress slid across the floor. Connor's golf clubs clattered loudly against the fireplace. People jumped backward to avoid the falling bags. "What is happening?" Someone shouted. Above them, Rachel calmly stood at the upstairs railing. Without showing the slightest emotion, she dragged another heavy bag to the edge and pushed it over. It landed with another deafening crash. "Your party is over," Rachel announced clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Take your belongings and leave my mother's house." Gasps echoed through the room. Lydia stared in disbelief as another bag split open, spilling handbags, framed photographs, cosmetics, and neatly folded clothes onto the expensive decorations she had spent weeks arranging. "My things!" she screamed. She dropped to her knees, desperately trying to gather everything, while guests stepped around her. Janice looked toward the staircase. "Stop her!" No one moved. Rachel continued dropping the remaining bags one after another until the attic storage area was completely empty. Within minutes, the living room looked less like an anniversary celebration and more like the middle of a hurried move. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Many quietly picked up their coats. Others slipped toward the front door without saying goodbye. No one wanted to remain in the middle of a family disaster. The applause that Lydia had expected earlier was replaced by embarrassed silence. I walked back into the house through the patio doors. The sting on my cheek had faded, but my determination had only grown stronger. Connor finally looked at me. His face was pale. "Mom," I raised one hand. "Not now." He fell silent. I looked around the room before speaking in a calm, steady voice. "You have 30 minutes." Everyone stopped moving. I continued. "Everything belonging to Connor and Lydia is now here. You have 30 minutes to remove it from my home. Anything left behind after that will be donated." Lydia looked up from the floor. "You can't do this." "I already have." She stood, trembling with anger. You planned this." "Yes, you humiliated us." I met her eyes without hesitation. "No, you humiliated yourselves." Janice stepped toward me, pointing an accusing finger. "We're family." I nodded. Family doesn't try to steal someone's home. She opened her mouth to argue again. I simply turned away. The conversation was over. For the next half hour, the only sounds inside the house were the rustling of plastic bags, car doors opening and closing, and the muffled voices of embarrassed relatives helping carry belongings outside. Several guests avoided looking at me entirely. Others quietly apologized before leaving. Connor made 3 trips between the house and his car. Each time, his shoulders seemed lower than before. Lydia never stopped complaining. Janice criticized everyone around her. Neither of them accepted responsibility. When the final bag had been loaded, Connor returned alone. He stood near the front door for several seconds before speaking. "I'm sorry." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I should have stopped this long ago." I looked at him sadly. "I waited months for you to do exactly that." He lowered his head. "I know." I extended my hand. "The keys." Without arguing, Connor reached into his pocket and placed my house keys in my palm. The familiar weight felt strangely comforting. He looked as though he wanted to say something else. Instead, he quietly turned around and walked outside. A moment later, the car disappeared down the street. The house became silent. Over the following weeks, Connor called several times. Sometimes he blamed Lydia. Sometimes he blamed himself. Eventually, he asked whether he could move back in for a while. I didn't return the calls. Peace, once reclaimed, is too valuable to surrender twice. I contacted my bank one final time and confirmed that every financial connection had been permanently removed. The automatic payments remained canceled. The guarantees remained withdrawn. Every responsibility that belonged to grown adults had been returned to them. A professional cleaning crew restored the upstairs bedrooms. Fresh paint covered the walls. The guest rooms became bright and welcoming once again. Rachel visited often after that. We spent afternoons tending George's rose garden, exactly as he had taught us years earlier. Life slowly returned to what it had once been. These days, my mornings begin with coffee in my favorite travel mug while sunlight fills the kitchen. The house is peaceful again. The master bedroom remains exactly where it has always belonged. And whenever I slip my keys into my pocket before leaving the house, I smile because they remind me of something important. A home is more than walls and furniture. It is built on respect. The moment respect disappears, no one, no matter who they are, has the right to stay.